asked myself the question, what are vampires to you? I came up with a couple different words. Growing up in the Christian culture I was involved in, I was taught to view vampires as evil. I was taught that they were evil mythical creatures, and because of this belief, vampires were always feared. Vampires and the talk of them also made me uncomfortable because they lived in the paradox of dead and yet undead. Through this paper, we will see how throughout history our brains have used storytelling as a way to help us cope with the world around us and our fears. While vampire stories were cool, they were also scary and brought more fear or even different fears to people. I will be looking at Prince Vlad, who is also known as Count Dracula, vampires, Godzilla, and werewolves, and how they came to be and what fears they represent in our lives. During different points in time, we have been able to see that mythical creatures like vampires have challenged how we view the world. Who, who is the real life Count Dracula, and how did his story come to be? Before taking this class, my knowledge of Count Dracula was that he was a made-up character, when in real life, Count Dracula is also known as Vlad Dracula, a ruler of a small country called Wallachia. Vlad Dracula was also known as Vlad the Impaler after he impaled thousands of people to save his country from the Ottoman Empire. Vlad used many unconventional military tactics in the hopes of being able to protect Wallachia, as their army was much smaller than the Ottoman Empire's. Prince Vlad's use of his imagination and creativity helped him to save his country by utilizing fear tactics against his enemies. The history of vampires actually goes much further back than the stories we have heard about Count Dracula. The first story ever published was a book called The Vampire by John Polidori in 1819. John and some friends were visiting together when a storm came through their town. While being stuck at the house due to the storm, they had the idea to come up with a contest where they had to create the scariest stories they could. Being able to build on the fear that they were undoubtedly already feeling due to the storm, Lord Byron, one of the friends there, was able to create a story about vampires, which was later published by John Polidori. Throughout the years, stories of vampires have continued to spread, shaping how we view the world. At the beginning of COVID-19, I distinctly remember hearing people talk about how COVID-19 was the new disease that could create zombies and vampires. Victoria Pengilly points out that vampires and zombies reflect the fears of death and disease. Godzilla reflects the fears of nuclear wars. Medieval mythical creatures reflect supernatural creatures that are seen in Christian theology, which was very prevalent at the time these stories have been created. Mermaids reflect the fears of being tricked or seduced. I think that they are also linked to the fear of water and drowning. Each of these creatures was created by someone using the fear of another and exploiting that fear. I believe that at the time that Lord Byron created his idea of vampires, he was trying to possibly find answers to the fears that he had, quite possibly the fear of death or disease. Now, by definition, people don't like their fears and often don't want to confront them. However, I think that deep down, we each want to have answers to the fears that we have or are experiencing. Something I have researched more this last year as I have processed through trauma that I went through as a child is how our brains use storytelling as a method of coping. For as long as I can remember, when I am experiencing a fear of some sort, my method of confronting that fear or trying to minimize that fear is through telling myself a story about it. Deborah Serrani from Psychology Today wrote in an article titled "Why Your Story Matters" that when we return and start to plot point our trauma narrative, we live through our story in a new way. Our personal narrative offers us a chance for not just understanding, but for recognizing our sense of self. A self that was wounded, broken, frightened, or lost, but now can be reclaimed. The power of telling your story allows you to transform the foreign into familiar, making this unspeakable speakable. Your narrative and yours alone can bring you awareness and closure, end quote. As I was experiencing the trauma as a child, the story I had to tell myself to cope with was that it was just a bad dream, or that I had to protect others from experiencing the hurt that I was experiencing, or that what I was experiencing was normal. Now, as an adult, having the knowledge and tools I have now, I have been able to start telling myself a different story. This story is my story, the real story of what happened to me and what all I went through. Through telling the story, I have been able to reclaim my sense of self and put the pieces back together. Barbara Fields wrote in her article, "How Storytelling is Good for Your Mental Health." Quote, "When we watch a scary movie, we are immersed in Hollywood's version of a story. During those 2 hours, we are being transported and living in an imagined world. The writer, director, costume designer, production crew, and the others are creating this story for us. When we connect with the characters in the story, our brain releases oxytocin. Oxytocin is associated with empathy and building blocks in helping us connect and deepen our relationships," end quote. Hollywood knows the importance of storytelling and how our brains are wired to connect us to a story through empathy. I have found this to be true as I have watched various vampire movies throughout this course and connected with the humans in the story, but also in a very real sense connected to the vampires. I saw their humanity and how sometimes they were just as afraid as the humans around them. In conclusion, I have learned through this course that storytelling is so important for our mental health, how we heal and process, and how it allows us to connect with others in a way that is relatable to them and their fears. I have seen through scientific research that we can use stories to positively and negatively impact our lives and share the fears that we have experienced in our lives.